Hello. We are reading for this segment chapters 14 and 15 of the Shakespeare Stealer. For vocabulary, we have cochineal, Cochineal, a red dye that is made from female cochineal insects. Oh, cochineal. Maybe cochineal? Anyway, dye made from bug parts. And lysome, easily flexible, or lysome. These aren't words that we really use on a daily basis, so they're Old English words, and I'm not quite sure how to pronounce them. Alrighty, here we go. When we left off, Widge was in a bad neighborhood, and someone is about to steal his clothes. I took a few more backward steps, preparing to run. You won't get far, the boy said. There's not a man or woman in sight that won't help catch you. We're all one big family here, don't you see? And we don't like strangers. I was just passing through. Well, then you've got to pay a passing through fee. He drew his dagger. Now what will it be? Your clothing or your ears? Neither, said a voice behind them. The large boys turned, and I took immediate advantage of the distraction. For the second time that day, I was on the run, and this time I was far from fresh. Hands reached out to stay me, but I was confirmed master of dodging, and left them with a handful of air. I expected at any moment to hear the boys thundering after me. Instead, I heard my name being called. Widge! Wait! Widge! I raced on, nearly blind with panic and fatigue. How had they learned my name? Widge! The voice called again, high and clear. Wait! It's me! I slowed and half turned. The two bully boys were nowhere in sight. Instead, a slighter and more welcome figure was chasing after me. Julian? I gasped. I stumbled over some obstacle and fell to my knees, struggling for breath. Julian reached me and held out a hand. I pushed it away. I can manage. Yes, well, you wouldn't have managed if I hadn't happened to show up just then, would you? Come. He guided me to a booth with grain sacks piled against it. Mind if we rest here a bit, Hugh? He asked a man within the booth. Anything you ax, me dear, the man said. You seem to be kenned here, I observed when my breath had caught up with me. Known, you mean? I should hope so. It's where I was born and raised. Alsatia, we call it. You grew up here? I looked at our squalid surroundings, then at Julian, whose appearance and manner spoke of better things. He shrugged. There were worse places. None that I've seen. Watch what you say, or you may never leave, not standing up at any rate. I glanced about nervously and got to my feet. I'll leave then now, I wis. I pointed down the street. The river's that way? I may as well go with you. It's only an hour or so until curfew, anyway. But you said you lived here. No longer. Not since I began my apprenticeship 3 years ago. I live with Mr. Phillips and his wife now. And your parents? They don't mind? Julian gave a humorless laugh, but said nothing. I looked back over my shoulder. How is it you escaped those two back there so easily? They wouldn't dare touch a hair of my head. I've got friends here that would cut their ears off, and they know it. I rubbed my own ears instinctively. They came near to cutting mine off. I should thank you. Yes, he said. You should. Well, I said, thanks, then. You're welcome. I truly was thankful, but at the time I resented the fact that he had to rescue me. Ever since I'd come to London, I'd been getting into situations from which someone else had to extract me. I was weary of feeling foolish and helpless and useless. I had failed to make even fruitful use of the one skill I did possess, the art of charactery. When we descended the rain-slick stairs to the water, Julian asked, Do you have passage money? Nay, I said, feeling helpless yet again. He handed the wary man 2 pennies and 4 farthings. As we pushed out into the river, he said, You can repay me when you get your wages. You mean I'm to be paid? When you get through your trial period. It's only 3 shillings a week, but it's better than nothing. Although, come to that, I suppose I'd do it for nothing. You would? Why? Why? he repeated, with a puzzlement equal to my own. If you don't know, you won't make much of an apprentice, much less a player. I won't in any case. Not with that attitude. The only ones who succeed are the ones who want it so badly that nothing will keep it from them. Keep them from it. It was hard for me to imagine. I had never bothered to want anything that badly, for I knew it was no use. In the past few days, I'd gotten a glimpse of a world very different from the one I was used to. A world I might have wished to be a part of, but knew I never could. What was the good in longing for something you could not have? Life was full enough of disappointments without making more. Once on the south bank, Julian said, "You can find your way to Mr. Pope's from here?" "I'm not wholly helpless," I said indignantly. "I'm glad to hear that." At Mr. Pope's house, everyone was seated at supper. Mr. Pope lifted his shaggy eyebrows in surprise as I entered. "Well, I supposed we'd seen the last of you." "Why?" "You wouldn't be the first prentice who runs off. Sanders said you found your first day not quite to your liking." "That may be, but I'm not one to quit." He nodded and smiled gently. Good, good. Perhaps you'd best change before you come to the table. You look like a drowned cat." As I climbed the stairs to our room, Sander came up behind me. "Why did you run off like that? Is something wrong?" "Nay," I said. "It's not." You can tell me, Widge. I can keep a secret." For a fleeting moment, I was tempted to open up to him. But how could I? If I did, I would be burning both my bridges. I could never finish my mission for Simon Bass, but neither could I go on being apprentice, once they had learned the truth about me. I shook my head. "It's not." He sighed. "I can't be your friend if you won't talk to me." "I never asked you to be my friend. I never asked for anything." The moment I spoke the words, I regretted them, but I could hardly take them back. Besides, they carried a certain truth. I didn't want him or any of the players to be my friend, for I would only have to betray them. And yet some part of me wondered how it would be to have a friend and to be one. Blinking, Sander backed away down the stairs. "Very well," he said in a hurt voice. "I was only trying to help." I spent as much time as I could reasonably drying off and donning my old clothing, which had been washed without my knowing. When I came downstairs, everyone had left the dining room except Mistress Willington, who cheerfully set before me a plate of food she had kept warm on the back of the stove. My day of rest had proved far from restful, nor did I get much rest that night. Each time I fell asleep, I dreamed of a hooded figure pursuing me and woke in a sweat. As we started for the Globe in the morning, I was heartened to see that for a change the sky was clear, but my small delight vanished when we arrived to find that our morning's task was to whitewash the roof thatch. "Gog's bread," I grumbled as we climbed the ladder. "Why does the thatch have to be made white?" Sander laughed. "It's to keep it from catching fire again." Would that it had burned to the ground," I muttered. Sander pulled up the bucket of whitewash. "What's that?" I said, would that we could do this from the ground." I stuck my long-handled brush in the bucket and made a few grudging passes at the thatch, then paused and looked out over the plain of the red-tiled roofs below me. "Why did they not make this one of tile? Too much of an expense." "Aye, and it won't cost them a thing if we break our necks." As I made another careless swipe at the rough reeds, I spotted on the road below a cloaked figure that I momentarily took to be Falconer. So startled was I that I lost my hold on the brush. It skittered across the thatch and plummeted to the yard 3 stories below. "Oh, Holy Mother! What's wrong now? I've lost my brush!" I stared gloomily after it. Half the yard was eclipsed from my view. Into the half I could see stepped a man with a large white splotch on one shoulder of his dark brown doublet. "Who is that up there?" the man called. "It's Widge," I replied in a voice as high and unsteady as my perch. "Who?" "Widge, the new boy." "Well, we don't need the yard whitewashed, Widge, nor the players." "Aye, sir." I turned to Sander, who was holding a hand over his mouth to stifle his laughter. "It's not funny. It struck someone." "Who was it? Not Mr. Burbage, I hope." "I don't ken. A wit wi' long dark hair and a pointy beard." Sander bit his lip and raised his eyebrows. "Mr. Shakespeare." "Oh, Gis! Will ha' me dismissed, do you wis?" I hate the way he talks. Not very like. He's a bit prickly at times, but not mean-spirited. Best go fetch your brush. Before I climbed down, I took another look toward the road. Falconer, if indeed it had been he, was not in sight. We whitewashed no more than the fourth part of the roof before the church bells rang terse, the hour for our lessons to begin. There were fencing exercises, made slightly more tolerable by the fact that Nick was gone. No one seemed to know where or why. After fencing, one of the hired men, a former apothecary's apprentice named Richard, instructed us in the art of painting our faces. As I sat looking before the looking-glass, brushing cochineal on my cheeks, a gypsyish-looking man with a high forehead and a mane of curly black hair came up behind me. A likely-looking lot of lissom ladies, eh, Mr. Shakespeare? Very fetching. Mr. Shakespeare glanced down at me. Have a care now. You don't want that brush to escape you. I flushed with embarrassment. There, you see? You've reddened your whole face. I'm sorry about the whitewash, I murmured. It will wash, he said. A pity it did not fall a bit to the left. You'd have saved me the trouble of whitening my face for today's performance. His words puzzled me until I realized his role as the ghost. So Hamlet was scheduled for this very afternoon, and here I was with no table book in which to set it down. That was meant to be a jest, Mr. Shakespeare said. Sorry. He shook his head. Thank heaven my audience is not made up of such sober sides. Sander, see that this lad is given instructions in laughing. Sander grinned. Yes, sir. When Mr. Shakespeare had gone, Richard looked us over critically. Very good, Julian. Sander, too much black about the eyes. You look as though you're consumptive. Widge, a little less whitewash next time, and smooth it out under your chin. Clean up now, it's nearly dinner time. As we wiped our faces, he said, It's sunny today, so wear a hat outside, else we'll be having to put a pound of white on to hide the freckles. Remember, it's easier to tan a hide than to hide a tan. Sander elbowed me in the ribs. Laugh, he said. As it happened, Sander would have done well to leave his face made up. When the time came for the performance, Nick failed to appear. Mr. Hemmings came back and took the book from Sander's hand. Go and get yourself up in Nick's costume. Do you know his lines? I've a nodding acquaintance with them, Sander said, his voice sounding uncharacteristically nervous. Have the property master give you his side, and read it from it if you must. Yes, sir, Sander hurried off. Mr. Hemmings looked after him, rubbing his forehead as though it pained him. Then he glanced over at me, and to my astonishment, thrust the book into my hands. Widge, you'll hold the book. If anyone seems lost for a line, feed them a few words. Not a whole mouthful, mind you, just a taste, to start their jawbones in moving. Can you do that? I closed my gaping mouth and said, Aye, and he strode off to deal with some other crisis. For a moment, all I could do was stare at the book in disbelief. All the fretting and scheming I'd done over how I would copy the play, and suddenly, here it was, handed over to me in one piece, without the slightest effort on my part. All I had to do was tuck it under my arm and turn and walk out of the theater. Chapter 15. Is he going to do it?
No, we're only halfway through the book.
It's true. Everyone else in the company was occupied with some task. No one would notice. And yet, what if they did notice? My intentions would be obvious, and all chances of completing my mission would be lost. I turned toward the door, hesitated, turned back, started for the door again, and encountered Sander, sweeping from the tiring room dressed as Hamlet's mother. How do I look? He asked anxiously, pushing at his voluminous wig. Far from calm myself, I gave him a cursory look up and down. Well enough, I wis. Wait, your sleeve's coming off. Pin it on, would you? Yes, very well, I said irritably. The task required both hands, and I glanced about, wondering what to do with the playbook. Here, I handed it to Sander. Make haste, he begged. I'm due on stage. I'm trying, I snapped, fumbling with pins. Why don't they just sew these on? You can change the dress about this way. Put different sleeves on. Have you got it? Almost. There was a flourish of trumpets about the stage. "It'll have to do. There's my cue." He started for the stage entrance. "The book!" I whispered urgently. He shoved it into my hands and dashed for the doorway, tripped himself up on his hem, recovered, hoisted the skirts in a very unladylike fashion, and burst through the curtain onto the stage. "Ah, Gertrude," the king said. "So glad you could join us." The audience guffawed at this spontaneous addition to the script. The king then launched into a speech that promised to be lengthy. Time to go, I thought. Suddenly the king broke off, his arm upraised as though frozen in place. I froze too, aware that something was amiss, but not quite sure what. A few snickers arose from the audience. The king cast a perturbed glance in my direction, and I realized he had forgotten his line. I yanked the book open. Before I could locate the proper passage, Laertes closed the breath. "Sorry to interrupt, my lord, but I beg your leave and favor to return to France." I looked about anxiously, certain that someone would swoop down and snatch the book from my incompetent hands, but everyone was too busy to notice. If I had had the sense that God gave sheep, I would have made my escape at that moment. But the king had another attack of forgetfulness. This time I had the book open to the place. "Take thy fair hour," I called out too loudly, drawing another snicker from the audience. The king snatched up the cue and ran with it. Behind his back, Sander made a gesture of approval at me. I couldn't help smiling. "Ah, well," I thought, "I can just as easily stay and help out here and still slip away before the finish of the play." When the scene was over, Sander came to where I stood. "How did I do?" "Whist," I said. "You'll make me lose my place." "It wouldn't be the first time," he teased. "Come now, truly, how was I?" "You were magnificent," I said dryly. "You fairly lit up the stage." He delivered a most unqueenly squat into my arm. "You dolt. Ouch. Will you go faddle with your pins or something and let me do my job?" "All right, then. It's plain I'll get no useful criticism from you." "You don't want criticism, you want praise." "Suppose I do. It would scarcely kill you." His voice had lost some of its jesting tone. "What do you care what I think? I thought we were friends." "Oh." I thought of how my words had stung him the day before. I dropped my gaze to the script as though it might provide my next line, but it was of no help. Just then the rear door of the playhouse flew open and Nick burst in, disheveled and panting. "Am I late?" he gasped. "By about half an act," Sanders said. Nick glared at him. "What are you doing in my costume?" "Playing your part, actually." "Well, take it off." When Sander made no move to comply, Nick tugged at the bodice. "Did you hear me, cook? Get out of my costume." "Soft," I said. "You'll be hurt out there." "Go eat hay, horse." He turned back to Sander. "Do I have to shake you out of it?" "You're in no shape to go on," Sander said calmly. You've got a bit of a beard for one thing, and from the smell of your breath, I'd say a bit of beer as well." "I'll beard you," Nick growled. He yanked at the bodice, pulling loose the hooks at the side. Sanders stumbled backward and tripped on the hem. His head struck the edge of the stage doorway with an audible thump. I had been doing foolish things with great frequency the past few days, and most of my life for that matter, and I now did another. I swung the heavy-bound book into the small of Nick's back. He let out a grunt of pain and turned on me, like a baited bear turning on the hounds. He lashed out at me, and the blow would have caught me full in the face had I not been so adept at ducking. Instead, it glanced off the top of my pate. Before he could swing again, he was seized from behind by Jack, the cannoneer. "What's going on here?" Jack demanded in a loud whisper. Nick shook loose from him. "He's tried to steal my part." Jack scowled at me. "You, eh? I knew you was up to no good." Sander got to his feet, rubbed the back of his head. "It's me he's accusing, Jack. Nick, if you're not here, somebody has to go on for you. You know that." Mr. Armin hurried up. "What are you boys doing? Your clamor carried all the way to the tiring room. Nick, where have you been?" "I overslept," Nick said sullenly. "Until nones?" He looked the boy over distastefully. "Go home. You're obviously not fit to perform. We'll discuss your fine later." "I've nothing to pay a fine with. I lost it all at dice." "We'll take it out of your future wages then, if there are any. Go on now." Mr. Armin waved a hand at us. "Back to work, boys. You're doing well, Sander. You too, Widge." Though it was a small enough praise, it took me off guard. I was as unaccustomed to praise as I was to having a friend or being one. The pleasant feeling it gave me was unaccustomed too. It gave me a small hint of what the players must experience when the audience applauded their effort. For the first time, Jack noticed that I was holding the playbook. He snatched it from my hands. "What are you doing with that?" "Mr. Hemmings gave it to me." "Well, I'm taking it back. I don't trust you." "But you can't—" I started to protest. Sander pulled me away. "Let it be. No point in making another commotion." "But that was me job." "Don't worry. You'll have it back soon enough." With a grin, he whispered, "Jack can scarcely read his own name." I made no reply. There was no way I could tell him how important the book was to me, or why. As I reached for the tiring room, I cursed myself for having hesitated and lost my chance to hand the book of the play over to Falconer. I would have to keep him waiting yet a while, and he was not the sort who would relish it. Nor, I thought, was he the sort, when I finally did deliver, to praise me for a job well done. Why is Widge torn about becoming friends with Sander?
Because he doesn't want to betray him.
Right. Because he felt he would have to betray them when he completed his mission for Simon Bass, but at the same time, he wondered what it would be like to have a friend and to be one. How does Widge gain an opportunity to steal the play?
When it was his job to help the people who forgot their lines.
Mm-hmm. How does he use it?
Use his opportunity, he wastes it.
He wastes it. After Nick appears after a scuffle with Sander, Jack takes the book away. Yeah, from Widge again. All right, that is it for this round. We will see you next time. Bye. Oh, look, I got a remote.